covering a lot of different topics, so hang in there as we go through some of these as well. We'll be watching the election today in Georgia. I know a number of our listeners are in Georgia, some of you even in the 6th Congressional District. It is going to be a very significant race, if for no other reason than the fact that $50 million was spent on that race, in large part because Democrats wanted to have at least one Democrat win in a Republican area so that it could say that maybe this would put the agenda of President Trump on the line. So we'll be watching that. Of course, we also are very saddened and have talked about, and we'll talk about maybe a little bit later in the program, the U.S. student that was brought back from North Korea who was in a coma and eventually died. And so we'll certainly talk about a relationship to North Korea a little bit later in the program. And also today is World Refuge Day, And for these various refugees, we're going to be talking about that in the second hour. But in this first segment or two, I wanted to spend some time talking about energy. Now, I know this isn't necessarily a sexy topic as some other ones are. It isn't one that people pay attention to until they have to pay their light bill, their electric bill. And in the state of California right now, it is declared that 50% of its electricity in that state must come from renewable resources by the year 2030. Now, a lot of you are not in the state of California, but let me just point out in just a minute, we're going to talk about what this means in other states. Also, some of the various gimmicks that have been used in places like New York and Nevada and elsewhere. We'll get into all of that in just a minute. But we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this in light of the push to begin to move towards more renewable resources, especially in light of the concerns raised about climate change. So I wanted to bring to the microphone Norman Rogers. He's a policy advisor for the Heartland Institute, has both a bachelor's and a PhD in physics, and has held a variety of engineering and computer programming jobs. Matter of fact, started a high-tech company in Santa Clara, California a number of years ago, sold it in 2005, has written on this extensively, and one of the articles we've posted here is his piece that appeared in the American Thinker, California's Bogus Renewable Energy. Norman, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
I'm happy to be here, Kirby.
Okay, this is
Kirby,
amazing.
I have to correct you. I don't have a PhD, okay? I only have a master's degree.
Right, okay. Well, that's good. Two bachelor's and a master's degree. I misspoke. And certainly let me say that you are going to help especially our listeners in California, think about this, because California has declared that 50% of its electricity in the state must come from renewable resources by 2030. And even more significant, as you point out in your article, it has sort of a bizarre definition of renewable resources. Can you help us with that?
Yeah, they have their idea of what's good electricity, what's bad electricity. For example, they don't like hydroelectric electricity if it's associated with a dam. They hate nuclear electricity, even though nuclear electricity does not give out carbon dioxide. So they mainly like wind and solar and maybe a little bit of geothermal energy.
So again, we're talking about primarily wind and solar, and those are the dominant ones. Again, just use California as an example, because what happens in California oftentimes ends up in other states as well. There isn't that much wind capacity, because if I read your article carefully, although I've lived in California in the past and many of our listeners are there, we see the wind turbines up on some of the hills. It's not exactly a place where you would get a lot of wind, and so even if you do, you've got to have the wind at the right times for it to be helpful as an energy source, don't we?
Yeah, well, California's kind of a wind-poor state, and they're actually, to get around that, they're actually, they say they're going to use a lot of wind, but what they're actually doing is they're buying claiming rights to the wind. For example, a wind farm in California could sell California a piece of paper, a renewable energy certificate, saying that renewable energy in Colorado hypothetically belongs to them, but they can't really send the energy to California. So it's sort of like carbon credits, the thing that Al Gore buys when he wants to fly his jet plane around.
Well, and this is the one thing that I got from your article, and I've read these kinds of things before. It does strike me as a bit of a shell game, because you say, for example, that California can say, well, we'll buy some credits from Colorado. And we have listeners both in California and Colorado. So then California can count renewable power consumed in Colorado as its own, and Colorado can still brag about how much renewable power is generated within its borders. And
Yes.
I'm not sure anything has happened other than we've transferred pieces of paper, or am I missing something?
That's exactly what's been done with transferred pieces of paper, and they actually have to buy them, and it's kind of secretive how much they're paying for them.
And so, again, take this for just a minute to our listeners, again, in California, but we'll talk about what this means in Illinois and what it means in Alabama and what it means in Georgia and a variety of other places. Because you have that push, there is less of a desire to do some things that could bring your costs down. One, which I've even written about recently, is to improve the way in which we transmit electricity because we have a somewhat archaic system. Another is if you're going to always be looking for these more expensive and less effective means of generating electricity, wind, solar, those kinds of things, your energy bill goes up, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. For example, in Denmark and Germany, where they are using a lot of wind, they're paying about 2.5 or 3 times what we're paying. Wind energy, although the people who are advocating it say it's competitive with coal or natural gas, it's not really because you have to have backup plants, to provide electricity when the wind's not blowing. So when you work it all out, wind energy is really about 3 times as expensive as traditional gas or coal or nuclear.
And let's talk about the environmental impact, and that is that you, in many cases, have a windmill that stands, 250 feet high. You've got these blades that are 120 feet long. You need probably at least 3 of them, so that's about 36 tons if I've done the math right. And so as a result, then you first of all have to keep them moving. And then in the process, you're killing off everything from birds and bats and just about anything that flies near them. And it's amazing to me that the environmentalists think this is such a great idea.
Yeah, they definitely do kill flying animals, and they also make a kind of a noise that some people find very objectionable, kind of a low-frequency swishing noise. And it's just not cheap electricity, and it's not dependable electricity.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue talking a little bit more about that. We're going to get into this idea of these carbon credits. And then what about some of these companies? We'll pick on Apple Computer just as one that have what's called a greenwashing operation that claims that its stores actually use renewable power. And if that's the case, how is that done? And then most importantly, who's making money on all of this? That's an important issue. And then just the other day, we had, this one now comes from Nevada and also in New York, but we'll take Nevada first. You have Elon Musk and Tesla actually said that they were going to simply boycott the state until they were reinstated. And so it's one thing when you have somebody throwing a temper tantrum when they don't get their government check. It's another thing when a billionaire throws a temper tantrum, and so we'll see how that plays out as well, and get into this whole idea of green energy and solar installations and much, much more. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Norman Rogers right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Although Ramadan is a holy month of fasting for Muslims, you may have also noticed that it also seems to be a time of an increased attacks on infidels. Last year during Ramadan, there were 421 dead and 729 wounded. This year, the statistics will be equally grim. At first, this seems like a contradiction. Ramadan occurs during the 9th lunar month in the Islamic calendar. It is a time when Muslims fast from their first prayer of the day at dawn to their 4th prayer after sunset. They also refrain from other activities and focus their minds on fervent prayer. Ramadan is a holy month, so why all the violence? On my radio program, I've tried to explain why Ramadan has become so violent, but let me merely quote from Dr. Jim Dennison's article, Why So Much Violence During Ramadan? He explains that Muslims believe they will receive greater rewards during this month on the Islamic calendar. Muhammad himself actually preached a sermon on Ramadan in which he said, whoever performs an obligatory deed in this month shall receive the reward of performing 7 obligations at any other time. One Taliban spokesman therefore proclaimed, our fight is jihad and an obligatory worship, and every obligatory act of worship has 70 times more reward in Ramadan. So it's not surprising that jihadists use this month to maximize their rewards. Each attack is different. A gunman stormed a casino in Manila. Attackers killed more than 24 Coptic Christians traveling on a bus in Egypt. A bombing in Baghdad killed a dozen and injured nearly 100. A suicide vehicle in Kabul destroyed parts of the German embassy and killed many, and attackers in London drove over pedestrians and then stabbed others after leaving the vehicle. Sadly, we still have a few days left before Ramadan ends. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with Norman Rogers, and if you would like to join our conversation, let me open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. He's a scientist, a business leader, publisher of climateviews.com. We have a link to that on our website, pointofview.net. Also a member of the CO2 Coalition, the National Association of Scholars, the American Geophysical Union, and the American Meteorological Society. We'll get into climate change in just a minute, but wanted to focus a little more attention on this idea of renewable resources and the idea of renewable energy. Norman, one of the things you wrote about is that the Apple computer company has said that they are claiming that they're using renewable power. Yet I've been to some of the Apple stores, and I know a little bit about where Apple is produced and computers and phones are produced. How do they make that claim? Is that a valid claim?
It's kind of crooked. They have a corporate environmental report, and they say their stores in the U.S. are all using renewable energy. They're obviously buying these certificates because, you know, the stores get the power off the grid. They don't really have a choice where the energy is coming from. And in their corporate environmental report, of course, they don't even mention the word China, where they do all their manufacturing. And, of course, China's famous for burning coal and not having good environmental standards.
So, again, that's part of the issue. And so when you hear this, I guess it gets to the bigger issue, too, because, okay, if Apple Computer can claim that, then Governor Jerry Brown in California could claim this. And, again, as this begins to go around the country, you could claim this in Illinois, and you could claim it in Alabama, you could claim it in Texas, you could claim it in Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, wherever it might be, because it's more difficult once I've started reading your article about these certificates to even be able to assure in the year 2030 that California really was using 50% of its energy renewable, because a lot of it has to do with simply shuffling papers back and forth, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. You know, they're not the owners of these wind farms are not supposed to sell the same certificates twice. So presumably there is a limited supply of them. But yeah, I mean, it's trying to fool people. 99% of the people in California probably think they really are getting their energy from wind farms and solar farms, not just buying certificates.
Now, one of the problems while we're talking about wind farms for just a minute is the wind doesn't always blow, and so that's an issue. And a lot of people have talked about what they call fickle winds, so that's a management issue. The best you could do then is maybe charge some batteries or something like that, or else I know some have talked about using that to pump water uphill in a reservoir so that later on water could come back down. But in most cases, as the power is generated, you pretty much have to use it right then. True?
Yes, electricity storage is a difficult problem, and the only thing that really works is this pump storage where they have two reservoirs, one above the other, and they pump the water up to kind of store energy and let it run down through the turbine to get energy. But that's only good if you have mountains, and lakes, and it's also expensive to build the equipment.
Well, and again, for our listeners in the Midwest, there are a lot of mountains out there, so that one's out of the question. Let's talk about solar for just a minute. First of all, the sun only shines in the daytime, pretty obvious, more right now since we're in the summer. And, there is such a thing as thermal solar, but let's eliminate that. People trying to come up with this. I remember a number of years ago that Los Angeles Community College District wanted to spend, and they did, spend millions of dollars trying to have all sorts of so-called clean energy. And as a result, they finally had to give up because they recognized that they would have to cover every one of their soccer fields, football fields, just open areas with solar panels. And they finally said that what would happen is Los Angeles Community College would look more like a Valley College power station than it would look like something else. So until we get some kind of efficiencies in solar power, we are talking about remarkably large kinds of solar panels, which only will give you power in the daytime, which is oftentimes the least time in which you need it. Oftentimes you need much more at night. So it does seem to me that, again, shooting for 50% of renewable resources, using a lot of that from solar power, just doesn't make sense from a physical point of view or even a financial point of view, does it?
No, solar power does use up vast pieces of land. It's going to be interesting. There's going to be an eclipse in August in California. That's going to cut the amount of solar power in half when the moon goes in front of the sun. So it'd be interesting to see if they can deal with that.
Let me take some phone calls along the way, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Since we're talking about California, let's take our first call from California. Raymond, you're on with Norman Rogers.
Yes, how are you doing today? Thank you for taking my call.
Yes.
I actually live in Palm Springs, California, and that's actually, we have at least 4,000 windmills from the San Gorgonio Passway that can actually power at least 6-7 cities that are out here. So I'm wondering if that can affect us major, because we're actually a big play in this game.
Yeah, what about that? Norman, any thoughts? Because, again, you only can put up so many windmills. You can only put up so many solar panels before you run out of space, don't you?
Yeah, and California has about 3 or 4 hot spots for wind. One is down by Palm Springs. One is the San Gregorio Pass. And I believe there's another one up by where the Sacramento River comes out of the Central Valley. Those are hot spots, and obviously you'll have a limited amount of space to put up windmills there.
Well, again, Raymond, any other comments? I guess I lost Raymond. But again, that, I think, illustrates only the point. Before we take a break, I wanted to get to one other issue in your article, and then we might talk a little bit about climate change and some of the material in your climateviews.com. And that is one of the things in your article, you talked about the fact that the environmental movement talks about good electricity and bad electricity. I assume that good electricity is only those things which they narrowly define as renewable, and that would be solar and wind. Bad electricity would be all the other things, which would be carbon-based or nuclear-based, or even, I guess, now they even put hydroelectric in that category. Is that how things are being described these days in terms of some of the public policy? Yes,
that's what's written into law in California. It's very strange. It's like they have a collection of prejudices. If they were really that concerned about climate change, you think they would welcome hydroelectricity and nuclear, because neither one of those puts out carbon dioxide to the atmosphere.
A lot of, I've understood that nuclear power, of course, is certainly clean in terms of carbon dioxide. Certainly hydroelectric would be. But even, isn't it true that natural gas generates less CO2 than, say, coal or oil? And so you would think that if you were really concerned about limiting CO2 emissions, any of those would be candidates, and yet they are all put into the category of bad electricity, aren't they?
Yeah, although I think natural gas is considered less bad because it does put out a lot less carbon than coal does.
Okay, well, let's take a break, and when we come back, take some more of your phone calls. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Norman Rogers with us for just a little bit longer, and we'll take some calls and questions that you might have. Also, I might point you to his website, climateviews.com. It is another great resource to begin to learn a little bit more about some of these issues on renewable resources, about global warming, which we'll get into in just a minute, whether or not coal is good or bad, and he's got an article there that was in the American Thinker about demon coal, so we'll get into some of those issues. And, of course, we'll talk about, is it even possible that the sea level will rise? It has in the past. It's declined, and it's rising again. And, of course, climate has changed as well. So we'll get into all of that. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just before we take a break, let me just mention that we are coming to the end of our fiscal year. That happens June 30th. Anything you can do to help us financially would be greatly appreciated. And as I've mentioned over the last couple of days, but let me mention it again, one of the things that we are always blessed by is that we have some donors that from time to time will say, you know, in order to encourage other people to give as we've been giving, we decided to not only give you money, but to make it part of a matching grant. So that means that your gift between now and June 30th will actually be doubled. So if you say, you know, I really appreciate what you're talking about here today. I'd never really even thought about how my electric bill is going to go up because of some of these mandates, or maybe some of the conversation we're going to have a little bit later about World Refugee Day or those kinds of issues. This would be a time for your financial support, and we would like to end our fiscal year in the black. As I've mentioned, we've just moved, so again, we have some financial obligations and some expenses that we normally don't have at this time of year. So if you can help us out, we would appreciate it. Because we have that matching grant, that means that every dollar is doubled. So your gift of $100 essentially becomes $200 to us. A gift of $50 becomes $100. So please take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says donate, and I hope some of you might even consider joining the Truth Team. For as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, you can be part of that Truth Team and help us out. We'll be back right after this.
Tell me if you can identify with this. The news is on, or you're reading comments online, and your immediate reaction is, what planet are these people from? There are giant chasms in America, a time when people can't even talk to each other without resorting to violence, fueled with false information peddled via biased, one-sided reporting, other things left out entirely. Christians are called to be truth-tellers and peacemakers. While others are shouting at each other across the chasm, we are called to build bridges. You're among 1.4 million people Point of View Radio reaches, giving you tools to build those bridges. Today, the investment you make, the gift you give, will be doubled up to $10,000. That's mental and spiritual infrastructure repair our culture desperately needs. Won't you join us today, please? Visit pointofview.net, click the red Donate Now button, or call for details 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Double your gift. Do it today. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Norman Rogers. And again, we have posted his article on renewable energy and also have a link to his website, climateviews.com. We'll get to that in just a minute. For some of you, you might say, well, I don't live in the state of California, so it probably doesn't affect me. Well, guess again, because many of these ideas that, of course, came in California of trying to have 50% of the electricity from renewable sources will show up in a legislature near you. And in just a minute, I want to talk about another little gimmick that has come from Elon Musk and Tesla. That one happened in Nevada. It's also happening in New York, but it'll also happen in your community. And I know sometimes when you talk about energy policy, you go, well, that's not a big deal, until you get your electric bill and it's 50% higher than it was a year ago. And you go, how did this happen? So that's one of the reasons we're covering some of those issues today. Let's take at least one more phone call about California before we look at some of the other things happening around the country. So we'll go to KYCC in California. Jay, thank you for joining us. You're on with Norman Rogers.
Thank you, Kirby, and good to talk with you, Mr. Rogers. I live up in the Central Sierras, and I'm actually a forester, and see the devastation that the drought has wrought upon us with the number of dead trees with the beetle kill and lack of forest management, but that's a whole other topic. But the Forest Service has just recently come out and said that there's over 110 million dead trees in Central and Southern California Sierras. We have an active biomass industry in the state of California, but yet a lot of those plants are not being utilized. Why isn't the state of California, if they want renewable resources, why aren't they using something like this that is carbon neutral to help augment the energy supply?
Norman?
Well, Jay, I don't know. It may be that it's too expensive to get the wood out of the forest. I can't really say why they're not using it. Obviously, there's a lot of expense involved in cutting down the wood and putting it on trucks and transporting it to a power plant.
Could be that. Of course, one of the things you point out is that some of the environmentalists in your article still even think that chopping down trees and burning them is maybe not the most environmentally effective way to go. So again, maybe part of it is a bias and part of it is economics, but never discount the ideological issues, right, when you deal with some of these environmental issues?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jay, well, I appreciate you giving us a call, and it is so sad to think about all those dead trees up there in the Sierra. I've backpacked up there many times before, and appreciate you calling in today.
Sure. Thanks.
Let's, if we can, get into one other issue before we talk about climate change, and that is, even today, they're talking about what has happened in Nevada. Of course, this has also happened in some other states like New York, but we'll take Nevada for just a minute. And that is Elon Musk and Tesla just decided to leave Nevada 2 years ago because they had a solar business that actually was affected by some of the policies. I'll just read from one of these particular stories. It said, Elon Musk boycotted the state until Nevada reinstated its net metering policy, which requires public utilities to purchase excess power from rooftop solar panels. Net metering is seen by some as a wealthy transfer from public utilities to rooftop solar companies like Tesla. During the time net metering was suspended, solar panel installations dropped quite a bit. And so this was another issue that what they are trying to do is say, well, if indeed there are some need for excess power, we'll purchase them from the solar panels. But because Elon Musk and Tesla left Nevada and have talked about in the past whether or not they would leave New York State if they didn't get what they wanted, you have some very big companies that are affecting, if you will, the free market, because their decision to leave or to stay can affect the way in which power is generated and ultimately what we have to pay for it when it comes in the bills every month.
Yeah, well, Kirby, I would say that rooftop solar is kind of a fraud. Rooftop solar is not really economical. Industrial scale solar is not economical. Rooftop solar is even more expensive per kilowatt hour. What these people who are supporting rooftop solar are really asking for is a subsidy. They want the power company to buy the electricity for the retail price, and the power company really has to buy wholesale and sell retail, not buy retail and sell retail, or it can't make any money. So there's been a considerable arguments about this, and of course, there's a lot of it's sort of like aluminum siding. There's people running around convincing people to put solar panels on their roof and sign up with a 20-year mortgage, and then if they decide to sell their house, of course, they've got that thing hanging over their head, that 20-year mortgage and the solar panels they have to resolve. So my advice would be stay away from rooftop solar. It's also a problem because a lot of times your roof is not oriented the same way, the right way to get the maximum amount of sun. You may have to cut down trees that are shading the roof, and may make your roof hotter. So it's just a kind of a gimmick, and it totally depends on government policy to make it at all economical.
Let's see if we can talk about your website for just a minute before I let you go, and that is climateviews.com, because this is a website that is really kind of a collection of various links and other issues related to the issue of climate change. And it does seem to me that right now there are some individuals that are having, if you will, almost a nervous breakdown because this president, unlike the previous president, has got some real questions about the existence of climate change, how much human activity is affecting it, and whether we should be part of the Paris Accords, which we have decided to drop out of, or some of the other issues. But back to the broader issue for just a minute. Climate has been changing for some time, and even if we look at some of the graphs that you have there, even sea level has gone up and down over the years. So when people talk about climate change, a lot of that climate was changing before we ever had coal-fired plants, before we even had SUVs, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there actually is nothing alarming happening right now. I mean, a lot of people who are advocating climate change say, oh, things are terrible, we're having the hottest year, all this kind of stuff, or we're having a lot more storms. None of this is happening. In fact, in the last 20 years, the globe hasn't warmed at all. That's something they don't like to talk about. In fact, back in the early part of the century, when they realized the warming had stopped, that we had in the late 20th century, they stopped calling it climate change. They stopped calling it global warming and started calling it climate change. And now they talk a lot about extreme weather. But they're in big trouble because nature is not cooperating with their theories.
That's for sure. One other question I wanted to ask, and you had an article that appeared also in American Thinker back in February entitled Demon Coal. The United States is like Saudi Arabia compared with our coal in terms of the tremendous resources that we have. But we've been told by environmentalists that coal is dangerous. It causes asthma. It's led to acid rain. You have written about this in just a few minutes. Can you kind of summarize what we now know about coal and whether or not that's still a very good way to generate electricity for Americans?
It's a great way to generate electricity. I visited a very modern coal plant down in Arkansas a few months ago, and everything that comes out of the smokestack is not, you can't see a thing coming out of it when it's operating at full power. They remove all the pollutants, and we have so much coal that we shouldn't really be diverting natural gas to be generating electricity, because natural gas is a premium fuel. Coal's not much good for anything except generating electricity, a few other minor uses. Unfortunately, the Sierra Club is running a campaign they call Beyond Coal, where they tell all kinds of lies about what's wrong with coal. They say it makes your children be retarded. It causes asthma, all kinds of things. It's just not true.
As a matter of fact, you even have one article on whether or not coal causes asthma. So let me just, before we let you go, talk about what is available there. That website is just chock full of great articles that you've written or other people have written. It's climateviews.com. If people click on your picture there, they'll be able to follow that. Again, talk about some of the resources that might be available, because there are going to be all sorts of debates, I suspect, in legislatures, maybe even in city councils, about whether or not to go towards 50% of electricity being produced by renewable sources, whether or not you want to have a green state or a green city, or whether you want to have sustainable development, all these buzzwords. So if people are looking for some of this information, they can find out on your website?
Yes, they can.
Well, Norman, I appreciate you joining us today here on Point of View. And again, if you'd like to join us, we're going to take a break. When we'll come back, I've got a couple other issues in the news. 1-800-351-1212. We've been following a couple of stories. First of all, what is going to happen tonight in Georgia, the 6th Congressional District? That is going to be an important race, which we'll be watching. Of course, the entire nation is. I guess so, after spending $50 million in the most expensive congressional candidates race ever, as far as I can tell. And then we'll also talk a little bit about what should our policy towards North Korea be and should be in the future and what that might mean. So we've got a lot of things to cover. And if you'd like to join us on any of those topics as well, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with some comments on those. And then in the second hour, spend a little bit of time talking about refugees on World Refugee Day. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Sophia McLeod was hired to work in customer service for XPO Last Mile, a logistics company out of Maryland. But he didn't even make it to his first day of work. When McLeod's operations manager called him to let him know he was hired and asked him to report to work on October 3rd, 2016, McLeod explained there was a problem. McLeod wanted to report to work that day, but it was Rosh Hashanah, one of the holiest days of the year for him as an Orthodox Jew. He asked if reporting the next day would be permissible. Initially, the manager agreed, but later that evening, the market vice president called to inform McLeod that the only days the company observed were federal holidays, not religious ones. McLeod chose to observe his holy day and showed up for work on October the 4th. When he did, he was sent home, and now the EEOC is involved, suing XPO for religious discrimination. EEOC Regional Attorney Deborah Lawrence said it well, quote, "The freedom to exercise one's religious beliefs is one of our nation's fundamental values. A one-day postponement of a start date is not an undue hardship," unquote. In other words, religious liberty and the corporate mission need not be in conflict. Accommodating the religious practices of our employees is good business. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Second hour, we'll spend some time talking about World Refugee Day, but wanted to focus a little bit of time and attention, not a whole lot, but a little bit on Georgia. And that is this particular race for Georgia's 6th Congressional District is significant for a couple of reasons. And that is there has been a real attempt on the part of the Democratic Party to throw off Donald Trump's agenda by simply having various kinds of congressional races being seen as a bellwether as to whether or not individuals were abandoning him and his agenda. And that didn't play out so well in places like Montana and others. And so the key kind of race where there seemed to be the greatest possibility would be in Georgia's 6th Congressional District. Now, it's significant in a couple of ways. First of all, it is the district that was held by the former member of Congress, Tom Price, who is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. It was a seat that was held, interestingly enough, by Newt Gingrich, although it's been redistricted, so it's not exactly the same one. But so that would be very significant, and it has been held by the Republican Party for nearly 4 decades. So it would have some obvious implications. Well, what happened in the particular race, which resulted in a runoff, was when they had the first round of voting back in April 18th. The individual that was the Democrat nearly got 50%, in part because you had 18 candidates, most of them Republican, and so they were splitting the race up pretty significantly. And so this has been kind of a battle between these two individuals, the Democrat who actually does not live in the district, and the Republican who has made a point about that as well. But the issue, I think, that is so significant is because this was seen as kind of the last opportunity in some of these special elections to be able to set aside the Trump agenda. It has led to $50 million being spent on a congressional race, making it by far the most expensive House race in U.S. history. And so you have all sorts of attack ads and all sorts of money being spent and all of the rest. So it will be interesting to see which of these individuals are elected. The possibility is the Republican candidate Karen Handel might actually win. And if that's the case, I think you're going to see a fair amount of depression among the Democrats to spend that amount of money and still lose. There aren't going to be too many other sort of bellwether elections. This one was seen as kind of a very significant one, a very high-stakes election. So we'll watch that and talk about that tomorrow, even though we have our Millennial Roundtable. We'll talk about that briefly. One of the other issues I wanted to put on the table is there are many people that for many years have argued that we need to do something about North Korea. And with this individual, this American college student who was released at the age of 22 after being there for a year and a half, no doubt tortured and perhaps dying because of that torture, this has caused a number of individuals to say maybe it is time to really act against North Korea. And there are reasons to do so. The first is that there are other Americans that are still held hostage, if you will, there. I might mention just something in passing that a lot of people tend to forget about or don't even remember from their history because they were born after that. And back in 1968, the USS Pueblo, which actually was taken and even to this day is in the river near Pyongyang, is still commissioned in the U.S. Navy. There's some that said maybe we should send in cruise missiles and at least destroy that boat that is used as, if you will, propaganda piece against the United States. Others have said that we need to bring greater pressure on North Korea through China, or that we need to do what we can to disrupt their nuclear capabilities, because someday, not any time in the near future based upon their failures, but someday they may be able to put a nuclear warhead on an intercontinental ballistic missile that actually works, and that means that then North Korea could actually threaten the west coast of the United States. And so there are some real concerns that people have had about what is happening in North Korea, and so that's something we will probably be talking about, especially in our Friday weekend edition. But, you know, one of the other issues that kind of surfaced with our conversation with Norman Rogers is this whole issue of our infrastructure. And if you have been following any length of time, Donald Trump's desire to have an infrastructure plan, he even proposed a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, which frankly I don't think is actually ever going to happen. But even as he talked about it, he said he didn't want to repeat President Obama's shovel-ready mistakes. You might remember that one of the things that Barack Obama learned is, quote, there's no such thing as shovel-ready projects. And there's a very good reason for that. And George Will recently wrote a column entitled America's Endless Infrastructure Mess, in which he was quoting from Philip Howard, who actually says that it's about time for us to figure out some way to revamp the way in which we have approvals for infrastructure. Let's look at it this way. When the United States as a country and individuals as construction workers decided to build the Empire State Building. It took 410 days. That was during the Great Depression, by the way. 410 days during the Great Depression, and they put together the Empire State Building. We built the Pentagon in 16 months during wartime. Though that tells you a lot. Well, by contrast, Philip Howard and George Will, quoting from him, talk about the fact that it's taken 5 years, 20,000 pages of environmental assessments and permitting to try to raise the roadway on a New Jersey bridge. And Philip Howard even explains that there's virtually no environmental impact because it's using existing foundations and right-of-way. For those of you over in the coast, the Atlantic coast, it's taken 14 years of environmental review merely to dredge the port of Savannah, and this has been, of course, an ongoing process for 30 years. And as I mentioned with Norman Rogers, you've had all sorts of environmentalists that have tried to prevent us as a country from modernizing our electrical grid. Right now, we lose about 16% of our electricity because we don't have a more modernized electrical grid. That's equivalent to about 200 average-size coal-burning power plants. In other words, we'd have to burn less coal. We'd have to have fewer power plants if we had more efficient energy transfer on these various wires and the electrical grid. So it's just, again, a reminder that there are some things that really need to happen, and there are a lot of distractions right now about whether or not there has been an attempt by the Trump campaign to work with the Russians, whether or not there's been obstruction of justice, and all sorts of issues which, frankly, aren't very relevant to the day-to-day lives that you and I live. And so, if nothing else, I hope that we can see Congress get back on track, the president get back on track, and do some things that are actually going to help the American people. But as we go to a break, let me mention again that we're coming to the end of our fiscal year, which ends June 30th. That's just around the corner, 10 days from now. So I hope you'll be thinking about what you might want to do to send in a kind of fiscal year-end gift. It can be of any size, but let me encourage you to consider what you might do to help us financially end this fiscal year in the black. And more importantly, as I mentioned before, we have a matching fund, which means that we will match your gift dollar for dollar. $10 becomes $20, $100 becomes $200, $500 becomes $1,000. Or, of course, if you would want to even join the Truth Team, we've encouraged you sometimes to consider what you might do for $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. This is something we certainly would encourage you to consider doing, and if you can help us even today by going to the website, clicking on that button that says Donate, we would greatly appreciate it. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about refugees. Under World Refugee Day, we'll spend some time focusing on that and take your phone calls. All that coming up right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers, defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily, and love you guys, and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, it is World Refugee Day. We thought this would be a good time to really talk about the refugee crisis, what the United States can do, how we can relate to refugees as a church, but also to think about some of the public policy implications of all of this and the economics as well. There is a lot to cover, and if you'd like to join us at any point, the number is 1-800-351-1212. Let me bring to the microphone the Executive Director of World Refugee Care, Jalil Dawood, and he is a former refugee himself, individual that really established this organization a number of years ago to model the love of Jesus to immigrants and refugees. It provides food and supplies, distributes Bibles, and supports churches in refugee communities in the Middle East, among other things. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Dallas, a THM from Dallas Theological Seminary in cross-cultural studies, and also as a senior pastor of the Arabic Church of Dallas. And am I getting your first name correct, Jalil?
Yes, sir. You're good. God bless you.
Well, thank you. Okay, let's kind of work from start to finish, and that is your own story. You were a refugee as well, so you certainly bring a great deal of experience to this, but tell us a little bit of your story, first of all.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me in the program. God bless you. My story, basically, it started from my grandparents. In 1915, the Christians in Turkey were killed. So my grandparents fled to Iraq as refugees from Turkey. And then my parents were born in the north side of Iraq, and I was born in Baghdad. And me and my parents also fled. I fled in 1982, and I didn't see my parents for 10 years, and it took the family 23 years together as a family one more time to have a reunion as a family. I fled because of the persecution of Christian and the war between Iraq and Iran that took a toll on 1 million lives, and a lot of people became handicapped, and a lot of people were in prison for 15 years and more. So I fled by the grace of God. The Lord protected me. The Lord shielded me from harm, and I was able to escape Iraq by myself. When I was 18, I escaped Iraq to Rome, Italy, and in Rome, I got to meet a missionary who introduced me to the gospel. A missionary was an American missionary who was helping the Jews fleeing and sharing the gospel with them fleeing Russia and the Eastern Bloc. During that time, Russia wanted to buy wheat from America, and President Ronald Reagan told them, "We will sell you wheat if you let go of the Jewish community that you have," and they were allowing that to happen. And I was blessed to be at this center that doing ESL, doing food program, doing community service in Rome for the refugees from the Eastern Bloc and Jews. And they shared the gospel, and I accepted the Lord at that time. And He discipled me, He loved me, and I came to America and started a life. Yeah.
Let me just mention that a couple of resources we posted on our website. One is a statement by Jalil on President Trump's executive order, so that gets us into some of the public policy issues. We also have a video. It's only about 1.5 minutes long. This would be something you might want to consider clicking the share button and putting it on your Facebook page or on a blog or a Twitter feed or something like that to tell people about this. And we're going to spend some time talking about what we can do or what we are limited by doing in terms of helping refugees. But before we get into some of the political aspects, talk about, again, why you founded the World Refugee Care, because I know that you're involved in really trying to bring the love of Jesus to immigrants and to refugees. And I know that you provide food and supplies and Bibles and other things. Talk about what that actually entails.
Yes, sir. What happened is, as a church, we're trying to get help for refugees. And people were reluctant to help a church, but they said, maybe if you are an organization, we can help you. And that's something that puzzled me, because in the Bible, you know, Paul took help from the European church in Greece to the church in Jerusalem. But today his church is saying, no, if you're a church, we don't help a church, or form an organization, maybe we will get help through that. And that's why I end up forming this organization to reach out to refugees, because I think this is the most critical time in the life of a person. When they are refugees, they are fragile people, they are sensitive people, they are people who are suffering, and they might be willing to listen to you while other times they might not. So the refugee point is a created point by the Lord, and the Lord loves aliens and refugees, as there is more than 70 references in the Bible about the care for refugees and loving them, and he mentioned them in the same breath as orphans and widows to care for them. So when we care for them, we show them the love of Christ. When we share the gospel, we do our job of evangelism, and we do our job of the love of God through Acts 1:8 is to reach out to the neighbors and to Samaria. So the refugee is more like a Samaria, somebody you might not be interested in talking to, somebody who is different perhaps, but the Lord says, regardless, I'm going to go through Samaria because I want them to be saved. And he went through Samaria and he shared himself with them, and we need to share him with the refugees. So we try to go overseas, we feed the people, we share the gospel, and we see a lot of people cry and in tears looking for help, spiritual help, physical help, and that's what we try to supply here and overseas.
One of the things that we've done here, Jalil, is encourage people to support the Cradle Fund, which was a way to actually help many of these Christian refugees from places where you used to be living in Iraq that find themselves in those refugee camps. And just before we take a break, the extent of the issue, the number I come up with, and I think you agree with this, is there are probably about 65 million people worldwide that would be in this category of having refugee status. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is absolutely correct. And I understand we can't maybe as one nation or as one organization or as an individual to help all of these people, but each one can do something for those people. Each one can love one person, can support one person, can reach out for one person, and that will multiply, and we can do a great deal of damage to the kingdom of hell and great deal for the kingdom of our Lord.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get political for just a minute because we do have some issues. One is under the previous president, President Obama, there were very few Christians that were allowed into this country as refugees. So we want to talk about what happened to the Christians and the Yazidis, who are actually Muslim. Then we have, of course, the current president, President Trump, and his executive order and how that has been interpreted by some of the courts and what that might mean. And again, to really understand some of the extent of the issue. And if you'd like to join us today, this is World Refugee Day. And I thought it was really important for us to kind of think about this from a Christian point of view, but also to get into some of the political issues as well. And so if you'd like to join us at any point, as we talk about refugees and immigration, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Although Ramadan is a holy month of fasting for Muslims, you may have also noticed that it also seems to be a time of an increased attacks on infidels. Last year during Ramadan, there were 421 dead and 729 wounded. This year, the statistics will be equally grim. At first, this seems like a contradiction. Ramadan occurs during the 9th lunar month in the Islamic calendar. It is a time when Muslims fast from their first prayer of the day at dawn to their fourth prayer after sunset. They also refrain from other activities and focus their minds on fervent prayer. Ramadan is a holy month, so why all the violence? On my radio program, I've tried to explain why Ramadan has become so violent, but let me merely quote from Dr. Jim Dennison's article, Why So Much Violence During Ramadan? He explains that Muslims believe they will receive greater rewards during this month on the Islamic calendar. Muhammad himself actually preached a sermon on Ramadan in which he said, whoever performs an obligatory deed in this month shall receive the reward of performing 7 obligations at any other time. One Taliban spokesman therefore proclaimed, our fight is jihad and an obligatory worship, and every obligatory act of worship has 70 times more reward in Ramadan. So it's not surprising that jihadists use this month to maximize the rewards. Each attack is different. A gunman stormed a casino in Manila. Attackers killed more than 24 Coptic Christians traveling on a bus in Egypt. A bombing in Baghdad killed a dozen and injured nearly 100. A suicide vehicle in Kabul destroyed parts of the German embassy and killed many, and attackers in London drove over pedestrians and then stabbed others after leaving the vehicle. Sadly, we still have a few days left before Ramadan ends. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Jalil Dawood, and he is the Executive Director of World Refugee Care. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, World Refugee Day. And if you'd like to join us, we certainly will take your phone calls. Jalil, I appreciate the fact that in the piece that we have posted here, where you really speak to the executive order, you get into some of the political issues, because oftentimes individuals doing any kind of compassionate care or philanthropy don't really want to get into that. But you point out something that we've talked about on this program before, and that is that if you look at the refugees coming from Syria, we'll just take that as the first step, under the previous president, President Obama, very few Christians, and I might also mention Yazidis, which is a small sect of Islam, probably were only about 1% of all those who came to this country or to other countries. Yep, those two religious groups, as you point out in your piece, make up at least 10% or more of the population. So there seemed to be a policy, maybe intentional, maybe inadvertent, I don't even want to get into what the motive was, that seemed to favor Muslim refugees over Christian refugees by a significant amount. Is that fair?
Well, what happened is President Obama brought Christians from Africa and Muslims from the Middle East, and he balanced it out that way. And the Congo, he brought Christians and Syrians and Iraqi Muslims, but he left out the people who genocide has taken place against them, which is the Christians.
Right.
The problem here was we can't bring equal amount of Muslims, and they are the one who persecute Christians. They are the one who commit this genocide. Granted, some of them are victims of violence, but we need to find a solution for them to stay over there.
Right.
If we, and then those Gulf countries that spend billions and billions of dollars on themselves, maybe perhaps they can come along and support those communities that belongs to them and support them and help them. And I'm not saying we can't have Muslims here, but I'm saying is the Christians must have a priority here. President Obama's policies in the Middle East, the so-called him and Clinton, so-called Arab Springs, created these issues that we're facing. He withdrew from Iraq, that created ISIS. He allowed the collapse of the regime of Libya, which allowed all these boats now to go towards Europe. And he undermined the government of Egypt. He undermined the government of Syria. And he created vacuums of power that created for the Muslims to exist and to flourish like ISIS. And then he didn't do anything about it in 2014 until the crisis of the Yazidis, where they were tortured, raped, and the Yazidis asked for help, and he intervened. I think he would have not cared to intervene on behalf of the Christians of Iraq, but when the Yazidis issue came up, he kind of had no choice. But we need to learn from history, and we need to learn from what happened in the past. In 1915, when the Christians in Turkey were slaughtered, more than 1 million of them,
yes,
and nobody looked at them, and that's when Hitler decided to go against the Jews. He said nobody's going to remember them because nobody remembers the Armenians. So it's a matter of justice. It's a matter of doing the right thing, regardless of who on the other end. But in this case, it is the Christians. It is the genocide against the Christians.
And again, let me just encourage people to learn a little bit more about what I call the Armenian genocide, which, as you point out, really in some respects gave, if you will, political and even moral cover for what later happened in Nazi Germany, and was one of those genocides that we would probably have remembered in the 20th century if it wasn't for the Holocaust and the complete devastation in World War II that kind of overshadowed that. When we talk about this, we've got to recognize, as you point out just a minute ago, that there are differences. There aren't any Coptic Christians killing Muslims, but there are a lot of Muslims killing Coptic Christians. There aren't a lot of Christians that have lived in Iraq or Syria that are killing Muslims. There are a lot of Muslims that are killing those who are Christians that were in Iraq and Syria. And you also made another point, which we've talked about before, and that is there are a number that are in these refugee camps. Some of them might like to come to the United States, but we hope that many of them will eventually, after ISIS, assuming ISIS is defeated, but after ISIS is defeated, go back, because we have virtually no Christian presence in some of the countries where we've had Christians for almost 2 millennia.
Yes, I agree. And that's why, Muslims struggles with the West. Muslims struggle with the culture of the West, with the faith, our faith here, the Christianity, the Christian faith. And that's why they persecute us, because they think we are Zionists, we are Americans, we are Westerners. They persecute us there. So if they are to come over here, it will create the same issue in their mind unless we do something about it, which is share the faith in Christ and change their mind about this. Otherwise, they're going to cluster together and create a problem for any nation they are in, because their religion call us infidels and subject to death and subject to be beheading, and subject to be persecuted. So we need to be careful, but at the same time we need to be caring to share the gospel with them if they are here. And the government job to be distinguished from our job. The church, we need to reach out, love the neighbor, love the enemy, pray for them. The government job needs to execute judgment against the enemy. And that's where we need to form a balance on these issues to guard our nation, protect our nation, and also reach out to the ones that the Lord has chosen and the one that the Lord wants them to know about himself.
And again, I want to get into what the church can do in just a minute, but just before we take our next break, let's talk about the executive order by President Donald Trump. And it's been referred to as a Muslim ban, but you basically say that that is not an accurate description. So how do we think about this executive order that is making its way through the courts and all the way to the Supreme Court?
It is not against Muslim, but if the Muslims are the one who are executing judgment and persecution of Christians, why would you want to bring them here? If they are the one in these nations, they're killing Christians. Why would you want to bring those people here? And the nation is a Christian nation overall, so they will persecute Christians also eventually when they have power, when they gain more power. So it is not a Muslim per se about a Muslim person, but it is against the religion that does not want us, does not care about us, does not think of us as a human, think of us as infidels, and our death is justified. And we don't need to speed up what happened in Revelation 20, chapter 20, verse 4, where the church, those who are beheaded, are screaming to the Lord, when are you going to avenge for us? We want to be slowing that so we can have the opportunity to share the gospel with people. So his executive order doesn't reach for me, doesn't reach enough, because a lot of nations like Pakistan is one of the worst, maybe number 3 or 4 in the list that persecutes Christians. It's not in there. And there's Iraq. Iraq is emptied. 1 million people fled Iraq since 2003, and we bring in people here. So we need to see this list as a good thing, and we need to add to it, and we need to challenge those governments that if you persecute Christians in your nation, your people cannot come here, your executives cannot come here. We don't want to do business with you till you fix these problems of a human rights issue and fix it to give the people the right. There's a blasphemy laws in Pakistan, and anybody who say anything wrong about Islam can be subject to death. There is a killing in Iraq of beheading people and ISIS and all of that. So the governments of America have the right to do these things.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, let's take some phone calls, too. 1-800-351-1212. Let me commend to you this statement that comes from World Refugee Care and from the President, Jalil Dawood, on President Trump's executive order, but it also gives you kind of a history of the refugee issue on this World Refugee Day, and I hope that you appreciate some of the conversation we're having, and if you'd like to join it, 1-800-351-1212. And if you do appreciate the conversation, let me again encourage you to give to this ministry. We are coming to the end of our fiscal year, June 30th, and if you can join us even today by sending in a gift, just click on that button that says Donate Now or Join the Truth Team. We would greatly appreciate your financial support, and the good news is your gift will be doubled because we have a matching grant. So again, $10 becomes $20, $50 becomes $100, $100 becomes $200. Your gift would be greatly appreciated. We'll take a break and take your phone calls right after this.
Tell me if you can identify with this. The news is on, or you're reading comments online, and your immediate reaction is, what planet are these people from? There are giant chasms in America, a time when people can't even talk to each other without resorting to violence, fueled with false information peddled via biased, one-sided reporting, other things left out entirely. Christians are called to be truth-tellers and peacemakers, while others are shouting at each other across the chasm. We are called to build bridges. You're among 1.4 million people Point of View Radio reaches, giving you tools to build those bridges. Today, the investment you make, the gift you give, will be doubled up to $10,000. That's mental and spiritual infrastructure repair our culture desperately needs. Won't you join us today, please? Visit pointofview.net, click the red Donate Now button, or call for details 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Double your gift. Do it today.
Point of View will continue after this. listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. World Refugee Day. Jalil Dawood with us. And again, he is the Executive Director of the World Refugee Care. Let's take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to Texas, KBJS. And Sarah, thank you for calling today.
Yes, I just wanted to make two comments. First is I really appreciate your speaker. I'm driving down the road and heard you guys talking, and I just can't believe he's so bold and brave to say what he's saying about the conditions for having people in our country and doing business with them. I think that's wonderful.
Right.
I think
lots of times people that are involved in any kind of compassion outreach don't want to talk about the political issues, and I really salute Jalil as well, because he's willing to look at both the issues, the policies and the procedures, the role for the church and the role for the government. And so I think you really will appreciate his statement as well as his little video that we have available on our website.
Okay, I just hope he keeps going. I hope he keeps being bold. I really appreciate his boldness. My second comment is unrelated to that, but I just wanted to tell you, I just recently saw the movie, The Promise, and I graduated from high school in 1966. I don't remember ever being taught anything about the Armenian Jewish persecution in Turkey. It was an opening to me. So the more education can be brought into play to understand these issues, I think the better.
Again, the new movie, The Promise, which has just been out, would be very helpful, because you think of all the movies they've done on the Nazi Holocaust, all very helpful and certainly reminding of us what happened, and even some of those movies about World War I. But in many cases, the Armenian Holocaust has been completely erased from history. And so, again, that's one of the reasons I appreciate Jalil bringing it up as well. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Yes, thank y'all.
I don't know if you've seen the movie, but again, I have not. I've just seen the trailer for it, but it helped me understand a little bit just even looking at that. And it's just, again, a reminder that we've been here before, Jalil. We think some people just say, well, if we just treat everyone well, if we just kind of hold hands and sing Kumbaya, that will be just great, and we'll have this utopian world. Well, unfortunately, I believe in human depravity. I believe in human sinfulness. And I also believe that individuals raised in a madrasas or in a place where there are various jihadists, they're going to have a desire to kill the infidel. That doesn't mean that all Muslims are terrorists, but it does mean that almost all terrorists are Muslims. And so it's important to pay attention to that. And so that is one of the reasons why people are a little bit hesitant about reaching out to refugees. But as we have refugees here in this country, or if people want to support refugees overseas, talk about for a few minutes before we take another phone call, what is the role of the church? What can we as believers do to help those individuals who are refugees in other countries or refugees that have come here to this country?
I think people need to realize that there is a lot of Christian refugees, first of all. There is a lot of Christian refugees that need our help beside the Muslims. And for the Christian refugees, I know, for example, in one nation that I visit, there is about, in the center of that nation, there is about 10,000 Christian refugees that need help. They can't get food enough. They can't have jobs. They are persecuted all over again, and while waiting to be going to a Western nation or America or Australia, Sweden and Canada and so forth. So they're waiting and they need help. I've spoken to some of them. They're in tears because they're waiting 2-3 years. They don't have any jobs or jobs that pay a little bit. And sometimes their employers don't pay them also. And if some of them, if they know that they are Christian, they will fire them. They will not have them with them in the job. So I would say there's physical need to those people, and I will say that there is a spiritual need. Some of these nations that are harboring Christians, there is no ministry for these people, and we want to minister to those people, so we go minister to them. And similarly here in America, we minister to people, even though there is help from the government and institutions, but some of them run out of help, and some of them are in need of help in jobs and language and the skills, learning skills. You want them to be stabilized so they can be productive citizen and tax-paying citizen, so this nation can be in peace and not turmoil eventually. So, the thing is this, is Christian agenda will lead to a national protection agenda. We need to know that loving your neighbor is a good thing for America eventually, and not think that, these people, we can't help them because they are Muslims or things like that. We need to love them. We need to help them so they know the love of Christ. And a lot of them are hardworking, productive citizens. A lot of them are thankful to this nation, and there is some who are not. And we need to know back in history, when 1915, the massacre happened, there was no Israel on the map, and there was no American involvement. Yes, and the persecution was there. So even if we don't exist, and they use this as an excuse, they use Israel as an excuse, they use America as an excuse, even without those two, we were getting killed over there. And we need to know the religion that we are facing, that have not always a faith-based religion, but it's a social religion, it is a political religion, and it is a spiritual battle as well. So it has three fronts, and we need to know about it and how to deal with it as people of this nation.
Let's, if we can, talk about how people can use some of the things on your website, because you have various reports and resources from the UN Refugee Agency, the U.S. Department of State, the Citizen and Immigration Services, and others. If a church right now is wanting to have an outreach to refugees in their community, and there's probably no listener who doesn't have contact, if not directly, certainly indirectly, with refugees that have been settled in their communities, and this could be a great outreach from the church. It does seem to me that you've got some resources that would equip them to be more effective in their refugee outreach to those people in their own community.
Yes, sir. I think it's, you can go to your community and reach out to the centers that bring people, that bring refugees, like the Catholic Charity or other charities that bring refugees, and connect with them and see how you can help them. As a church, how can you help them? How can you establish also ESL programs in your churches for them, and share the gospel, and not to be afraid to share the gospel and care about them physically and spiritually, and let the Holy Spirit work through your work and through your word, and the result belongs to the Lord and not to us. But we need to do our part as a church, and not to be political about it the whole time, and not to get involved spiritual, and that will be eventually help the political arena and help this nation. I know there is a universalism movement that want to open borders, want to build the Tower of Babylon without the Lord, and that's what's happening. And that is not a good thing, and that's not of the Lord, because the Lord is not in it, and we need to get the Lord involved in our work.
You mentioned something in passing I would like to come back to for just a minute before we take a break, and that is ESL, English as a Second Language. I have found that, really interestingly enough, if a church develops that, you almost become an attractant, because there are so many refugees or others that have come here as immigrants or under asylum or whatever it might be, who want to learn English. So if your church even says in a newspaper ad or in a bulletin, or even if they have some place where they have a marquee out front that you have ESL, you will attract people. You don't have to go find them. They will come find you because they want to learn English. And when you're teaching them English, you can really teach them the gospel, can't you?
Yes, and that's that's how I came to Christ. The center was teaching ESL, but they will invite people to Bible study, and in the Bible study, the cross was explained, the blood of Christ, what he did for us was explained, and I accepted the Lord. So I think, we have to do our job of sharing the gospel, and that's one tool, and there's other tools Ruth in the Bible was given a job through Boaz, and Boaz allowed her to stay there and collect food. But through that, he loved her and he married her, and through that came David, and through that came the Lord Jesus. So we really need to think of refugees as someone like Ruth, who didn't know the Lord, but says, your people,
Boaz.
my people. Yes, sir.
Very good. Let me take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Jalil Dawood with us, and again, he's the Executive Director of the World Refugee Care. Talking about this because it's World Refugee Day. We thought you'd like to hear this conversation, and we'll come back and take your calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Svi McLeod was hired to work in customer service for XPO Last Mile, a logistics company out of Maryland, but he didn't even make it to his first day of work. When McLeod's operations manager called him to let him know he was hired and asked him to report to work on October 3rd, 2016, McLeod explained there was a problem. McLeod wanted to report to work that day, but it was Rosh Hashanah, one of the holiest days of the year for him as an Orthodox Jew. He asked if reporting the next day would be permissible. Initially, the manager agreed, but later that evening, the market vice president called to inform McLeod that the only days the company observed were federal holidays, not religious ones. McLeod chose to observe his holy day and showed up for work on October the 4th. When he did, he was sent home, and now the EEOC is involved, suing XPO for religious discrimination. EEOC Regional Attorney Deborah Lawrence said it well, quote, "The freedom to exercise one's religious beliefs is one of our nation's fundamental values. A one-day postponement of a start date is not an undue hardship," unquote. In other words, religious liberty and the corporate mission need not be in conflict. Accommodating the religious practices of our employees is good business. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/savingamerica. That's firstliberty.org/savingamerica. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/savingamerica.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jalil Dawood with us. He is the Executive Director of World Refugee Care. Find out a little bit more about that on our website, pointofview.net. Got a number of phone calls. Let's get through those as quickly as we can. We'll head first to California. Dan, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, Dan Gonzalez. I'm from Oakland, California. My family's farmed grapes in Oakland for over 100 years.
Yes.
My foreman, Rigoberto, he got married about 12 years ago, and they had a young daughter, and she's now grown up in school. He paid an attorney in San Francisco a lot of money, over $10,000, to get his wife legal, and that the attorney finally, after several years, said, "You got to go through El Paso to get your papers." So they went to El Paso, picked up the papers, and they went to visit the family in Guadalajara before returning.
Yes.
Before returning, well, immigration told him after the fact now that she's in Mexico, that she can't come back for 10 years.
Yes.
Because they marked her 15 years ago. She tried to come into the country and had illegal papers, and they marked her. So now she's stuck in Mexico. Her daughter, a U.S. citizen born, stayed with her. My foreman came back to help me with the ranch, and they're telling him that he cannot get his wife back here for 10 years.
I would certainly want to contact your member of Congress, first of all, and then ICE and a few others to see if there's some things that you can do, some pressure that you can bring, or some negotiations. Because that, as soon as you said going into Mexico, I kind of realized what might actually happen. But I hope, Dan, you can work out something there. Jalil, do you have any suggestions? I know that this is not the first time you've heard a story like that, is it?
Sometimes some things can go wrong. Like one of my brothers, it took him 10 years to make it here. And sometimes justice does not serve the people well, and we just need to pray and seek, justice for the right people to make it here.
That certainly would work with Homeland Security, ICE, contact your member of Congress. And most importantly, let me just encourage our callers and our listeners and everyone to pray for Dan and that situation and that family. Let me say, in the limited time, let's go on to another caller here in South Carolina. Sarah, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, thank you. I just tuned in and was listening and heard Jalil talk about ESL and in the church. And I am an ESL teacher. I'm certified, and I was wanting to ask him, how would he suggest getting ESL started in the church as an outreach and as a ministry? Is there a curriculum that he knows about, or if he could give me some suggestions as how to get started and how to get it going?
Sure, and you might also want to correspond off air. We've got the link to his website, which if he doesn't have a chance to give you all the information, you can go to worldrefugeecare.org. It's on our website. But Jalil, any suggestions? I am very familiar with some churches, even within a few miles of where we're broadcasting today, that have developed ESL programs. But what kind of curriculum and other things are available?
I think you need to go to their community, and if the church is far away from where they are, you need to establish point of connection in their community, like renting an apartment within their apartment. And, start with the letters, start with basic things before you can find and create program for them. But there is other programs. You can Google and see which one fits you the best. But I would say establish something near them, not far away from them, because a lot of them would not have transportation to get to you, or establish your church events to bring them from their community to your church and start that program with them.
I might just mention, Sarah, I just was, while we were talking here, did what he just suggested, did a Google search on ESL curriculum, and the page just fills up with millions of different curriculums, some from different ones, some having to do with those that are young, those for adults, some for various regions. There's some that have games and arts and music, so it seems to me that there's quite a number, and I would think that a Google search might provide some of those fairly quickly. And if anybody has some that they've used in the past, if they want to send us an email here to Point of View, maybe later in the week, I can mention some of those on the air, if that would be helpful. Let's see if we can take another phone call real quickly. We'll go to Kentucky and talk to Kathy. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, you've really lifted my heart today. I was part of a home group in a large church back in Ohio. We no longer live there, but we were able to sponsor a refugee family from Sudan. They were Catholic, but we didn't know until they arrived what their faith would be, but they turned out to be a remarkable family. The man had such leadership skills. He took it upon himself to organize the whole Sudanese area, all the refugees that were in the area who didn't really even know each other. He got himself into college and continued his education. He has a daughter who is now in a college in Ohio on a scholarship with track, and it's just a remarkable, wonderful story. He was persecuted by Muslims while he was in the Sudan. So it's just heartwarming to see if you, step out in faith and what the Lord will do. So it was just a blessing to all of us.
What a great story. And a good way to end, isn't it, Jalil? Because, again, if we just recognize that we have, 300,000 churches in America, let's recognize that some of them wouldn't be interested and some of them might not even be evangelical. But even if you take a fraction of those and recognize the number of refugees coming here, the church can be a real solution to some of the issue of getting refugees, meeting their physical, spiritual needs, and helping them assimilate into American culture. So I do believe that what you are doing there at this wonderful organization, World Refugee Care, is something that people need to know more about, and that's why we wanted to give you some exposure today on World Refugee Day to a national audience.
And I appreciate you, and I'm thankful to the Lord for you and your work. God bless you.
Well, again, if people want to contact you, they can go to worldrefugeecare.org. Of course, we have the link on our website, pointofview.net, and talk about some of the resources that might be available to them or how they could help you begin to meet some of the physical and psychological and spiritual needs of these refugees. How can they do so?
Yes, sir. I think we need to remember the Lord Jesus looked for. He went toward sharing the good news and doing the good work, and that was his mission on earth. And we need to do similar by contacting us, telling us you want to help refugees, and we will help refugees physically and spiritually. And any resources we get, we put it toward that work, and we can sponsor families. We sponsored 10 people last year, and we brought them to the West, and we helped them every month till they made it, and we can sponsor much more, but the resources need to be there so we can help people stand and save them. If Schindler's List saved 1,100 people, each one of us can help one person and save one person and guide them and bless them.
Jalil Dawood, thank you for being with us. Let's do it again soon. And again, if you did not have a chance to get through or would like to contact him directly, it's worldrefugeecare.org. Graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary, also a pastor and an individual that has a real heart for refugees. Just before we go, though, let me mention one more time that we are coming to the end of our fiscal year end. It ends June 30th, 10 days from now. And if you appreciate the conversation we've had today, for example, about refugees and the fact that you probably are learning from an individual that has taken a really bold stand and perhaps even dealing with some of the criticism because of that, I hope that you appreciate the conversation we have every day here at Point of View. Tomorrow is our Millennial Roundtable. I know that you will enjoy that, and so we're looking forward to that with Nick Pitts and Alibeth Stuckey. I want to thank those behind the scenes as well. And that would be Andrew and Elisa. And if you would like to join us, go to the website, pointofview.net. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team. But we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do. And just the way you're so formative. I listen to you daily. guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help this nation at Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your program, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.